Well, I really appreciate being here today. I got involved with redistricting somewhat differently, I think, than many people. I originally got involved because of a number of cases that are basically around the Voting Rights Act. The most, I think, significant one, or the first one, was in Nassau County, the town of Hempstead. I worked on the case called Gooseby versus the town of Hempstead, where we ended up in Hempstead with ultimately lines. It had no districts at all. And from that time, I've done a number of other cases. In fact, I was interested to hear Susie Oppenheimer talk about Portchester. I was the government's expert in the Portchester case, where we ended up not with redistricting, which was what we, or districts, which was what we were hoping for, but we ended up instead with cumulative voting, which I would try to avoid if, you know, in the future, even though it did return one a Latino representative. So I do come in from a slightly different perspective, and actually, as I was speaking with John Flateau before the meeting, I actually have two plans that are now in effect from this round. I did New Rochelle, and I also did Westchester County, and they've actually been enacted into law. And so far that we haven't been sued. So this is, I have my fingers crossed, but that's really one of the sine qua nons of decent redistricting. So, so that my perspective may be somewhat different. I actually admire very much Susan Lerner, but I come at in fact, she and I have a lot of common notions. I guess common cause, it would make sense, but the perspective is slightly different. So maybe we'll go through quickly this PowerPoint. Now, in my opinion, and this is based on some demographic analysis, it's very likely that if something isn't done, we're going to end up with 2012 being a rerun of 2002. And what happened in 2002 is that there was a shift of population from upstate to downstate, relative population. And however, overall, New York didn't grow that fast compared to other parts of the country, so 2 congressional seats were lost. So we're really, you know, ready to do this again. Go to the next slide. So what happened? Well, for the Congress, and people probably don't want to remember this, but for Congress, there was actually an impasse declared because the state Senate and Assembly and the governor could get together and get a plan passed. So there was actually 2 masters appointed. One was Marshall Turner and another was Beveridge Groffman, and they drew a plan which then I guess was unpalatable to both sides of the aisle. So then suddenly a consensus was reached, and that's our current set of congressional seats. And in terms of the state Senate, there were public hearings all around the state. But I think nobody had heard about an idea of moving the state Senate from 61 to 62 seats. And so at the very last minute, the plan came forward. Obviously, it had been drawn in, you know, the dark room, some room somewhere. But at the very last minute, a plan came forward with 62 seats. And what that did is it moved 1 seat downstate. And for those people who do redistricting, that sounds like a good idea. But what it basically means is every single seat in the kind of downstate region, which includes the 5 boroughs plus some of Westchester County. Long Island was exempted because of the way that the population worked out. They basically had to redistrict every district downstate. They preserved upstate by carefully tailoring the size. So every district upstate was light. Every district downstate was heavy, except for Long Island. And so and then they've also maintained some racial gerrymanders. The biggest one, and actually it's been blamed recently, I think Senator Klein sits in that seat now, but it was the Villela seat. And I was actually on TV in New Rochelle, and they said, well, what about this, you know, I think they blamed it on Jeff Klein. I said, no, that was a racial gerrymander to keep Villela in. In fact, they went beyond anything because they actually looked for Italians. I mean, I remember this very well. They looked for Italians in Eastchester, which is fairly near where I live. And then in the Assembly plan, I mean, plainly the Senate is ground zero. Because what happened with the Senate 62 seat? You ended up with a deadlock. If they hadn't added that district, it wouldn't have happened. So it really led to the farce that we've just experienced. And then the Assembly plan, to some extent, was a mirror image of the Senate plan. In other words, a lot of districts downstate were light, a lot of districts upstate were heavy. That doesn't have quite the same effect because the growth is downstate, so they'll catch up downstate. I mean, so you could even argue that you want to do a little bit of that. But anyway, that is the fact. So go to the next slide. So now what can we expect this time? There's massive redistricting needed to be done, and I'm going to show that quickly in a minute. And normally political deals will determine this unless you don't pass Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And last time, frankly, you probably wouldn't have, except for who was in office. Because from what we understand, the staff at the Justice Department didn't want Section 5, you know, we're going to say that this plan violated Section 5. If no plan is in place, you'll have an impasse. And if the lines are challenged in court for some other reason, like Section 2 voting rights. So the likelihood of this scenario is you're going to slide right back into court. I mean, let's be blunt, if you don't sort of step back a little bit. So go next.